Retrying may be one of the first tools we have to detect flaky tests. In this video, we're going to learn how to configure flaky test detection in 8 frameworks. Now, to be clear, I don't think retrying is a good tool to fix flaky tests. The idea is to use retry to finally detect flaky tests. Ideally, your CI provider, your CI/CD pipeline should do it for you, but configuring retry can help you detect flaky tests locally and avoid checking them out in your repository. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is, are we going to retry? And I think the answer is it depends. It depends on kind of environment you're dealing with. For local environments, I think it's good to retry because it lets you cover the flaky test. If your IDE supports rerunning your test, that should do it. If not, you can configure your test framework to do the retrying for you. Now, if you're talking about CI, now the answer is, again, it depends. If your CI provider supports flaky tests and has a flaky test dashboard like Semaphore, then you should let your test fail. You should not implement retrying because that will hide the tests that are flaky. If you can log the failures in any sort of database or file, then in that case you can retry because you can then examine that file and do some analysis. But if you don't have any of those options, I think you should not retry, so the pipeline fails and you know there's a problem. You can compare different pipelines and find where the flaky test has appeared. So here we have a flaky test. This test is going to fail 50% of the times, and as you can see, it passes and fails randomly because of the random value. Now, if you want to rerun the test when it fails, we need to configure Jest to use this feature. So the easiest way is to configure Jest retry times. We can set a number of retries, and with log error before retry, it will show the error during the test. Now we see that it has retried. The first time it failed, and now the second time it passed. So this is what we want. If you are using TypeScript, you will need to import Jest from Jest/globals. Now, if we want to do this on every test, we need to hack a little bit Jest. Let's create a file, for example, called retry tests, and then we put the code for retry here. Then we did jest.config.js, and we add this file into the environment, so this loaded before each test, and that way you will run retries on every test that fails. So on Ruby, we can use Rspec. I've installed it here and initialize the configuration. Then I have here my test that will randomly fail 50% of the times. You will see this is a pattern we are going to repeat in every framework. So since Rspec does not include this feature, we can install a new gem called Rspec retry. So in order to enable the retry plugin, we need to first require the file, the gem, and installing the gems allow us to add a retry keyword. We can set the number of retries here. Let's test this. As you can see, we have a first retry, and then on the second turn it works. So this will retry 20 times before giving up. If we remove the retry keyword, it will go with the default value in the config. We can also override the number of retry attempts with the Rspec retry count, and this will take precedence over the config and the value on the test. Now let's see how to test some Python code using PyTest. I have installed PyTest and created a little bit of a test here that will fail twice for these two numbers. So this is what we get. We get two failures right here in the middle. These are the failures we coded into the test. Now if we check PyTest help, we see two features that are really useful for us. These are last fail and failed first. It will use a plugin that comes with PyTest included, with this cache manager, and it will cache all the results for all the tests, and the next time it runs, it will run either the failed first or it will rerun the last failed. So this is kind of what we want. If we run PyTest FF, we see that the failed test will run first this time and the rest of the test will run later. And if we run PyTest LF, only the failed test will run, the rest won't run. So this is not exactly what we want. It's not automatically rerunning the test, but it's built into PyTest and it's very useful to run your test again very quickly. Now, if we want to rerun the test automatically, we'll need to install a plugin here. The plugin is called PyTest retry, and installing that will allow us to add the retry keyword into our tests. So here we have a different version of the test. In this case, we are using pytest.mark.flaky. This is PyTest retry feature, and let us add the retry value here, so we can set a retry count, and it will retry 20 times before giving up. And if there is some failure in these retries, it will mark the test as flaky. And as you can see, I ran it once and it passed, and the next time it marked the test with R because it's retrying the test. So in this case, we're only running 2 tests, and as we can see, it tried 4 times before it passed. So this is exactly what we want. We want to retry our test automatically, and we get a nice marker here, say that this test failed but eventually succeeded. We can also pass PyTest dash retries and the number of retries, and this will retry all attempts, all tests, the number of times it requires until it passes or gives up. And we can also combine this with FF to run first the test that failed. We can also run PyTest cache show, and this will show all the test results, and the last fail will be at the beginning, so we can get an idea of what test has failed and what tests have been retried and eventually passed. So for Java, using Maven, Maven doesn't include retry plugin by default, but we can install it. First, we need to install the JUnit plugin, and then we are going to install plugin for Maven, which is the Maven Surefire plugin. This will enable retries. Let's see the test file. This is, as usual, some tests that will randomly fail. So to test the project, we're going to run Maven test, and as expected, it's going to fail sometimes and pass another. Now, to run the retry script, the Surefire plugin, we're going to pass the variable Surefire rerunning failing test count. We're going to put some values here, for example 5, and then run test. And this will attempt to rerun the test as many times as required. For example, in this case, it ran 4 times with failure, and the 5th time it passed. So this is one way to see flakiness and automatically retry failed tests in Java and Maven. Now it's the turn of Rust. We have here a flaky test. We have a flaky function and a test that runs a flaky test. We normally run tests with cargo test. And here we're going to see that sometimes it fails and sometimes it passes as expected. Now cargo does not include a retry function by default, but we can install the cargo next test. This is an extension for cargo that allows us to run retry. We are going to go to next.st. This is the next test plugin for cargo. We're going to copy the install file and install it in our machine. Now we can run cargo next run with dash retries, and this will attempt several times to rerun until it passes. So as we can see, it made 1, 2, 3, 4 passes, the 4th pass. So this is a very simple way to automatically retry just by adding the plugin to cargo. Now if we want to set a default for next test, we are going to create a folder called cold.config and a file called nexttest.toml. Inside, we're going to set a profile for the testings. We need to put the number of retries, and we can configure a backoff so it doesn't retry without delay. Here we're adding one fixed delay from 1 second every time the test fails. And now we can see that even though we remove the retries, it's still retrying by function until it passes. As an alternative, you can also export the variable next test retries and set the number of retries here, and this will also do the same. We'll override the values from the config. In this case, we're running the test at most 10 times. Now let's go over with PHP. We're going to use PHPUnit to run our tests. It includes an automatic retryer, so it's just what we need. First, we need to install PHPUnit. Then we create phpunit.xml and set up the autoload so it runs tests on every file in the test directory. Now, in order to run many times the test, we can use the dash repeat. In this case, it's going to run the test the number of times we asked, and it's going to tell us how many times it failed. So in this case, it ran 20 tests and failed 10 times. We can improve PHPUnit by adding cache result and order by. This will create a file with the results for every run, and it will first run the dependencies and then all the defects. So it will rerun the failed test first. As you can see, this is a little bit better because it runs failing test first, and this is what any good test framework should do. Now let's try with Elixir. Here I have defined a flaky function and a flaky test. So in order to test this project, we are going to use mixed test, and usually it's going to fail and pass randomly. Elixir also has the failed option, which will rerun only the failed test until they pass. But this is not auto retrying, this is just retrying manually. So let's see how we can make it more automatic. So unfortunately, there's no way to rerun from Elixir using mix to retry failed test, but we can fix that with a short bash script. Here we are running the test first, and then, for example, we are setting 20 retries and using a failed test, and it will stop once every failed test has passed. As you can see here, it tried once and then retried another time, and the third time it passed. So this is an easy way to retry Elixir unit test. We are using ExUnit as the test framework here. So last but not least, let's do Go. I have created a Flaky test here with Go. This will either pass or fail. Unfortunately, there's no retry in the Go native test runner, but we can install GoTestSum, and this will allow us to retry failed test. One thing we have to be careful when running tests in Go is that it's going to cache the builds, and in some cases you won't be seeing flakiness. One way to test without hitting the cache is to use this option -count, and we can put any number, but usually one works best, and this will rebuild and rerun the test. As you can see, it's flaking. Now to rerun the packages that failed, we're going to add the option rerun fails. This also requires that we add packages. We can add the name of the packages or all the packages, and then here we can put in the count, how many times we want to rerun the tests. So here it's showing me how it's trying to run 5 tests and some cases failing. So this is automatically running, and here 9 tests passed and 11 failed. So and we have the error logs here at the end. So this is a way to automatically rerun tests in Go. That's all I have for today. I hope this video helps you configure your frameworks to detect flake test. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, follow us for more content. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.